What's up, guys? It's John Nelson, and you're listening to the Starting Block Podcast. Guys, this is a show for complete athletic development. The objective here is to give you the tools to win, whether you're the athlete, the parent, or the coach. As always, I'm here with my co-host, Chris Scarborough. What's up, man? How are you?
Hey, good afternoon.
Guys, if you're new to the show, welcome. Appreciate you joining in. We operate different than your normal podcast. We actually we'll have multiple shows within the show, so you're going to get a Q&A from us, typically bi-weekly. That's where we'll tackle the questions you submit to us. That can be anything related to the neuro stuff, to the training performance. You name it. Anything our guests have brought on the show, you can send those to us. You can reach me at Farmer John ELP on Instagram. Chris, where can they get you?
Fast and Agile 49 on Instagram.
So that's a Q&A. That's a bi-weekly episode. The other bi-weekly episode is going to be the guest interview. That's just like every other podcast on the planet. That's where we're going to bring in our friends, our colleagues from across the country and globe. They'll share their stories of what they do with their clients, their patients, how they win. And it's also a great opportunity to network with people that share the same core values and mission that we do. And then that third, or I say 3A, 3B, because it'll alternate periodically just based on what I can and can't do. Might be like a Friday Fire episode, which is like a brain dump of just something going on in the industry that I feel is relevant. Or we're going to have an athlete spotlight, which again, we have big goals for that. We just got to get it up and running a little bit more consistently. We've had some scheduling problems, so haven't been able to make that a true reality yet, but we do feel that that's going to be a great addition to the show. Guys, as always, we don't run ads at the show, so if you enjoyed it, please share the show. Bring us a friend. Help us spread the message. That's all we ask from you. And so, I think that covers up all the housekeeping, so right to it, man. So let's get it. Let's get it. What we got going on?
Okay, John. So if you are not wanting to monitor weight as your primary measure in a weight room, okay? Everybody knows you can measure weight, correct? How much can you bench press, John? How much can you squat? But with a lot of push toward measuring something else besides weight, what else do you measure in order to show progress?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good question, and I think we're probably going to have the same answer for it. First off, I'll say it's not a knock on velocity-based training or those metrics whatsoever. I think those are very valuable metrics. I think it's all just kind of how your facility's built, I guess, if that makes any sense. Like I've never used a Tendo unit. I've used a lot of those velocity-based measurement tools. And I feel like there's a lot of effort to put in for little reward, I think, on my end. Or you're just at a point like kind of in the business yearly cycle where it's like, I'm dealing with middle schoolers or low level high school athletes where I don't need to be measuring really bar speed anyways, but I can see it more beneficial for like my college and pro guys, to do that. But so if I'm not going to be using, like a push sensor or, Tendo unit or something to measure bar speed, then I think we would look at, which I guess is kind of what I've always looked at, which would be just like somebody's position, somebody's movement, which I guess would kind of go into position as well. And just in general, their response to the exercise. So like if I'm working velocity, I'm going to be doing maybe speed work, but I may also be doing some type of like EDI exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're going to be watching, their loading, their landing pattern. What happens when they hit? What happens with their back? What happens with their feet? Those are just, I wish that was a more scientific way to do it, but I feel like just having an eye for how the person moves is a really huge metric to that. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and by the way, one among other things, one of the big benefits of ISO Extremes, besides recovery, and we've done whole podcasts on the recovery end of ISO Extremes, but the other thing it really does, John, is kind of what you just referred to, and that is it's a great teacher of position. So if you're in the improper position, you're going to feel something. For example, I'm just going to give you one easy example. How many times do you see someone in an ISO Extreme push-up and you got your hands in one place and you got your elbows turning way inside? Maybe, hands are out, but the elbows are dipping inward. Well, chances are that kid's feeling something in their shoulder joint, and not in the actual pectoral muscle. That's just one example, of many things. Um, if uh, um, if they're in an iso extreme lunge, and they'll say that um, they're too extended in their front knee, meaning their knee is behind their ankle on the front leg. The first thing let's say that you do a Russian lunge. Well, the first thing they're gonna have to do is dip down because they're already trying to push with their quad to hold themselves up. That makes sense.
Oh yeah.
So you there's little things that you can use to measure besides just weight. In fact, if you see a lot of these compensation patterns in position, John, not only are they not ready to monitor velocity, they're sure not ready to handle weight.
Right.
They have really bad patterns that they're probably need to address before they actually measure either one of those things.
But like you mentioned the push up, which is, I mean, that's a unbelievably common weakness or error in
Yes.
people, is the elbows collapse in. But
Yes.
I think naturally somebody's going to ask you the question, well, if their elbows collapse in, how is that a velocity related issue at all?
Well, if you want to know the answer to that, if that is once you are ready, find out find out how if you want you. Well, let me back up. Just measure your bar speed once you are ready, and you will already know the answer to that question. If your arms ever get out of position, that bar speed will slow considerably. Okay? When I say considerably, I'm just going to throw out an example. Let's just say it takes you 1/4 of a second to concentrically lift a bench press, okay, from your chest to arms extended, okay? Again, this is an example. If I'm in position and I can make that lift happen in 1/4 of 1 second, as soon as those elbows, in this case, usually on the concentric part, the elbows shift outward, okay, not inward like they do on the eccentric, but outward on the concentric. You see that? Now that 25 hundredths of a second is now 35 hundredths of a second.
I'm following.
All because of position. All right, not because the bar's heavy, but because they're out of position. So it's almost one of those things that, okay, you're this person. How does somebody buy into that? Well, you probably won't know the answer until your body is ready to actually start moving things at high velocity. If your body's position's not right, you're not ready to do anything.
Yeah, no, I
You
don't
know,
disagree with you at all.
so
I don't disagree with you all, but I think, and I don't want to get too far off the subject of how we measure velocity,
all right,
without using a unit like that.
right.
But I think, again, another common question that somebody's going to have is, is they'll say, like, for a baseball player, they're going to say we have to develop, we have to develop these power. We got to develop some type of power, so we need to do some type of med ball work or something along those lines where there
Mm-hmm.
actually is a velocity in the movement. So, what is the response to that?
Okay, well, okay, if you're saying you have to, once again, if in most cases, let's say we take someone some athlete, and they're put into any exercise too soon, their body's not prepared for it. I don't care if it's med ball work, I don't care if it's Olympic lifting, I don't care what it is. They're going to start showing some symptom of some sort that we don't want. My elbow hurts. My shoulder hurts. Well, this, that, or the other, if it's not too bad, work through it, whatever. They're going to show some sort of compensatory pattern. And if their coach or their trainer is not very keen, does not have a keen eye, that thing could go on a little bit too long, and eventually that kid's going to miss a lot of time because they have an injury. It may not even show up in their training. It may show up when they're actually pitching, or when when it becomes a more critical time. So while I don't disagree, I have no problem with med ball work or whatever. I have no problem with that stuff whatsoever. But I'm very pro find position first, regardless of, I don't care what it is, squats, lunges, push-ups. Um, Scapula pull-ups, which we do, even bicep curls. Positions first. Once you get all those things, the velocity will come because you don't have the compensation.
I think another way to look at velocity is also just not how fast something moves, like how fast you can move a bar, but also the intent that's behind the movement. I think there's a lot of people that believe that velocity based training is only about moving a bar as fast as you can. And that's obviously part of it, but I think there comes along with that a reasonable expectation that there's a true intent behind moving it. And so that can go back into the things like the ISO extremes. Just because you're not moving doesn't necessarily mean you're not developing velocity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where a lot of people get lost.
Right.
And
Well,
I think that's what you're trying to say in a roundabout way. Like, there's nothing wrong with med ball throws, but maybe that's just how you display it. You can actually train velocity by doing something like an ISO extreme lunge in perfect position and pulling the right way. And you're teaching the body to move the way the body is supposed to move. Or, like, say you have an extreme slow bicep curl, right? Like, if I'm actively pulling down with my triceps the entire time, then I am teaching or reinforcing the nervous system and my muscular system, like, hey, this is how my arm is supposed to work. My tricep is supposed to extend, my arm, not slowly lower the bicep like a lot of people teach. And so when you
mm-hmm.
actually do that with intent, you actually actively pull, you are developing velocity because you're teaching the muscular system how to fire at its most rapid rate.
Yeah.
That's what I see it that way as well. I don't know if that made any sense, but that's how I view it.
Yeah, it does. I mean, because, and I think that's, again, we mentioned, many of the benefits of ISO extremes. Again, recovery being one, learning position is second. But once again, as you just mentioned, I mean, the very fact that you're teaching one set of muscles to shorten and the antagonist to those muscles to lengthen in a balanced pattern, absolutely, you're going to create more velocity.
Yeah, because that's ultimately what velocity is. Is, again, David, don't text me and tell me you're pissed at me for saying this because I know you will be. But it's about how fast you turn a muscle on and off, or how fast one contracts and the other lengthens. Is that not velocity?
Yeah, absolutely. Right, I mean, you're going to have, I mean, we're of course going to measure, if we're actually measuring velocity in a weight room using a device, it's going to be true limb velocity, correct?
Sure.
That's exactly what we're measuring, but yes,
right.
You're absolutely right. I mean, you could have, fast motions and very short motions that are very fast, obviously, that you don't necessarily measure the velocity. You might measure the height. And I'll give you an example of that. A Russian lunge. You pull down, you pull down, you pull down until you explode up. Mm-hmm. The more explosive that pattern, the higher you're going to jump, and then the more velocity you're going to land with, because you jumped higher, you're going to be landing at a higher velocity than if you jumped a very low jump. So it's kind of this self-feedback mechanism. So it's we can use things. I mean, kind of going back to the original question, we can use velocity, we can use position to measure. Which, by the way, how many times have you found someone who's out of position and they're symptomatic? My knee hurts, my hip hurts, often, my back hurts. It happens a lot. And usually all you have to do is fix that position in there, and their pain is gone. I mean, it's not like they're injured. A lot of times they're not injured. They just don't move properly, or they don't coordinate properly. They're not shortening and lengthening muscles at the appropriate amount and velocity. As a result, they're symptomatic. So, yeah, it's what, like you said, I mean, it's ISO extremes can, yes, train velocity without actually moving at velocity.
Mm-hmm. And then you can do drills like med ball throws to help display that.
Correct. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It made it sound like, hey, I'm anti med ball. I'm not anti med ball. I'm not anti barbell. I'm not anti weight. To be honest with you, but it's got to be done appropriately. You know, position first, then other things be way before you ever get to where you lift anything heavy.
But there are some people out there that, I mean, their whole facility and training belief is based off of velocity based training.
Mm-hmm.
Numbers matter, and they're measuring everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, like, what is the argument to them, or the statement to them, and saying there are other ways? Like, you're actually possibly doing your athletes a disservice because all you're doing is measuring kind of this output rather than this foundation. And I think they probably say foundation is the strength component, but we believe foundation is the position component.
Right. Well, I kind of look at it this way. You find good positions, the velocity comes. The weight comes. You're able to lift more, you're able to lift faster. You're able to do more repetitions faster. Whereas, because a well-positioned person is it's I won't say it's unbreakable. That's not really true, but it becomes much more unbreakable than one that's off, right? So as a result, if someone's pure, you're asking if someone's purely velocity based. Was that your question, John, or was it?
Well, I just know there's a lot of coaches out there, and maybe some that are listening to this show,
Mm-hmm.
that they rely very heavily on velocity based training metrics.
Mm-hmm.
So they're measuring bar speeds constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And that is kind of their system,
Right.
so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but again, I think they would find that, assuming that person's in the right position, proper technique, they're running with proper technique. For example, they're sprinting, or lifting with proper technique. I think they'll find their velocities can go up a lot better. So I think it'll be a self-feedback mechanism there. So I think they would actually find they have better numbers if they, So yeah, I wouldn't say that they're not against each other. I would say they would actually go together.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation because I think you're looking at things from really two completely opposing, maybe not opposing, but very different viewpoints.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because in a lot of people's minds, velocity is a number,
right?
Which it is, but
it
velocity
is, right.
can also be movement oriented and position oriented.
Right. It can be influenced heavily by position. Sure, absolutely.
That's a good way to say it. Yeah, that's an interesting topic and an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it is, and John, I kind of want to bring this back to a podcast that your friend and mine and guests on the podcast, two guests on the podcast, Tony Holler and Dan Fichter, had recently with Adam Archuleta, who was very famously known to have been trained by Jay Schroeder. Well, if you, that was probably the best, well documented, I guess you could say, transformation of a football player from, not even recruited to first round draft pick. I mean, Adam's he's probably the king as far as that story goes. It was very impressive, the transformation he made. As a general rule, you could say that their training was very velocity based, very heavily velocity based. But if you were to ever go back and ask, Adam or ask Jay or any of these guys, they would first tell you that it was position based. They had to, get in the right position. The velocity, they got the velocity because their positions were so good. And then they could do it so well over and over and over again and fail. Even when they failed, they were in the right position. That they got faster still. Even when you fail, they still got faster. It's like,
right.
That doesn't make any sense until you realize, oh, but I was in that correct position, and you have to be in that right position even when you're exhausted. So, I think there's a lot of information kind of flying around the internet right now, that everything just be speed. And while that's certainly true, how do you get that? Well, I think there has to be, as you mentioned the word intent, John. Absolutely. You have to have intent in everything that you do. Um, you have to be disciplined, and, which, finding that right position, it takes discipline. Hey, I just want
Yeah.
to, I just want to hold this ISO extreme push-up position. If you're just in any old position, it's not an ISO extreme. Okay, let's just call it what it is. You're holding a bad position, and you're probably going to get nothing out of it except a bad shoulder. So, and I'm not sure what else to kind of take away from that, but intention. Heavy intention, heavy attention to detail, and again, position first. Velocity will come. It really will.
Yep. No, I agree. All right. Well, that's all we got for you today, guys. We had just a single question we wanted to touch base on. So, shorter episode this week. But you know the deal. If you like the show, share it, shoot us some questions, and we'll be back next time. See you later, guys.
Thanks, guys.